Sitting behind the electoral success of a wave of right-wing leaders in Latin America is a sprawling transnational network of far-right influencers, YouTubers, and commentators.
Pues prácticamente todo el mundo hoy tiene acceso a un teléfono de estos, otorgándonos el título a todos y cada uno de nosotros de pequeños brazos armados en defensa de la causa de la libertad.
Across the region, these figures are fighting what they call a cultural battle to reclaim the past. In Argentina, a push is underway to revise the record of military rule in the country.
Durante mucho tiempo se ocultó una parte de la historia y se impuso una verdad absoluta. No había nadie que se le animara.
These arguments have also found appeal among a younger generation, which grew up surrounded by corruption scandals and economic crises, with no memory of the region's history of dictatorship.
Milei y su vicepresidenta Victoria.
Javier Milei and his vice president Victoria Villarruel are engaged in a battle over memory, and one of the most important figures who informs the official narrative about the past is Agustín Laje.
La idea era completar la historia para las generaciones que no vivimos la época, que se montó sobre un relato mentiroso sobre los años 70, un relato totalmente distorsionado.
He's not a government official, but his videos, articles, books, and speeches are part of the intellectual environment of the government.
El entorno intelectual del gobierno.
Javier Milei ha visto en mi trabajo.
What Javier Milei found in my work is a confrontation with the woke agenda. The right has always neglected culture, and within culture, history plays a fundamental role. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future." In other words, control over a historical narrative has a decisive political impact. But the right, usually focused on economics, has entirely ceded that field to the left. That ended with Javier Milei. Milei brought culture to the center of the discussion.
La cultura al centro de la discusión.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the military coup that ushered in the dictatorship of General Jorge Videla. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Argentina's military oversaw a regime of mass murder. Human rights groups say it was responsible for the torture, killing, or kidnap of some 30,000 people, known as los desaparecidos, the disappeared. Many were held in secret detention centers where there was systematic abduction of babies from pregnant women. Others were killed in so-called death flights, in which prisoners were thrown out of a plane at sea. Each year, the anniversary is a moment to commemorate the disappeared. Javier Milei marks the anniversary in his own way. The presidency's online accounts release documentary-style films that center the violence of left-wing guerrilla groups and question the number of victims. One of the voices featured is Agustín Laje.
Regresando a la cifra de los 30.000 desaparecidos, lo cierto es que jamás surgió de ninguna investigación.
It's part of a much larger narrative that can be heard across the country's airwaves.
O sea, no te tenés que dejar engañar con un solo relato. Hay que ver la historia con los dos ojos, no solamente con el ojo izquierdo.
Pero la única forma de tener un país mejor es contar la verdad de la historia. Ni de un lado ni del otro, ni víctimas ni victimarios.
A movement advocating for the so-called complete memory of the events of the dictatorship, one that reframes the repression of that time as part of a dirty war between two sides.
No podemos explicar que Montoneros, ERP, FAR y FAB mataron 1.094 personas. Eso se tiene que poder decir en la Argentina.
Lo que busca la narrativa de
What the complete memory narrative seeks to do is incorporate a historical truth that had been denied from the outset. Those who attack the complete memory narrative are the ones denying a portion of history that, for reasons of political, ideological, and economic convenience, they choose to leave out of the picture. It means recognizing that guerrilla and terrorist groups existed, and that they, too, systematically violated human rights against the civilian population.
Los planes de aniquilamiento y de violación a los derechos humanos.
Es cierto que hace algunos años.
It's true that a few years ago it was inconceivable to talk of a dirty war or question the figure of 30,000 disappeared. And those limits have been pushed. What's acceptable speech has shifted with the arrival of this new radical right wing in power.
El golpe del 24 de marzo del 76 fue reclamado, exigido por una gran parte de la población argentina.
Today, you can find content on primetime news channels or online that trivializes or relativizes the seriousness of the dictatorship's crimes for a young audience.
In 1983, Argentina's military dictatorship came to an end, and the country led a pioneering effort to seek transitional justice. For the first time anywhere, a democratically elected government put the former generals of a dictatorship on trial. The so-called trial of the juntas, parts of which were televised, was a watershed moment. But over the years, right-wing parties began accusing liberal governments of producing a one-sided narrative about military rule. Then, in 2023, came the election of Javier Milei. The president has since slashed funding for human rights groups that work on archiving and investigating past abuses, and he has labeled education about the dictatorship indoctrination. As a result, the United Nations has warned of alarming setbacks in Argentina's historic commitment to memory, truth, and justice.
El gobierno de Javier Milei ha hecho muchas cosas.
Javier Milei's government has done many things. Funding has been cut to groups that claim to defend human rights in Argentina, but that, in reality, became implicated in corruption scandals. The government also funded educational institutions and universities that functioned as centers of left-wing indoctrination. Milei's administration began cutting funding to all of this. I believe that this aspect has generally been well received by society, insofar as there were voices that had been completely excluded from the public sphere, and that have now been able to bring another part of the truth to the table, a part that had been kept out of the discussion.
The political narrative about the 1970s dictatorship has always been contested. There was never complete consensus around that narrative. The government is trying to establish that there's a silencing or a bias when it comes to constructing the memory of that period.
Las generaciones que no vivimos los años 70 queremos conocer la historia de manera completa.
There's a whole army, one could say, of trolls and social media posters who are responsible for viralizing and amplifying this discourse.
Amplificar este discurso.
Every single country in South America endured a period of military rule, regimes that subjected their populations to state terror, often with the direct or indirect support of the United States. In Argentina and elsewhere in the region, the effort to rewrite that history, to bring another truth to the table, has too often looked like sanitizing the past, rehabilitating a fascist ideology that is no longer a cultural taboo.
No solo en Argentina.
This is not limited to Argentina. It's a much broader regional trend. Throughout the region, the left has controlled the historical narrative. In Chile, for example, there's been a reassessment of Salvador Allende's history that became a topic of discussion in recent elections. In Colombia, President Petro found himself pushed out by an outsider, Abelardo de la Espriella, who accused him of being a guerrilla fighter and a terrorist. So, history persists, history continues, history carries all of its components, all of its fragments, forward into the most immediate present.
Hacia el presente más inmediato.
Es importante que los jóvenes...
It's important that young people don't forget that these are absolutely extraordinary crimes, not comparable to anything in Argentine history. And those types of crimes are not called crimes against humanity for nothing. They don't have a statute of limitation.
Entonces, banalización y relativización.
So, trivializing and relativizing these crimes is dangerous because young people lose sight of the seriousness of what happened, which puts at risk the founding pact of our democracy, which is nunca más.
Nunca más, nunca más qué.
Never again what? Never again that kind of extraordinary violence.
Thanks for watching. Leave us a like or a comment to let us know what you thought about anything we covered this week. The links to our social media and our newsletter are in the description. That's where you can follow us for updates from the show.